Welcome back. You're watching The Nation. In 1985, with the political tension between New Zealand and the US at breaking point, the then Deputy Prime Minister Geoffrey Palmer went to Washington DC. His mission was to come up with an ANZUS deal that would satisfy both sides, a mission that ultimately failed and led to the banning of US warships in our ports. Sir Geoffrey Palmer joins me now from Wellington. Good morning, Sir Geoffrey. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Now, you were acting Prime Minister when the crisis really began to unfold and David Lange was in Tokelau. Before he left, had he briefed you on this issue of the Buchanan visit?
I knew that he was working on this issue, but I had no knowledge of the detail and he hadn't talked to me about it at any length because he only got the request, I think, the day before he left to go to the Tokelau. And what happened was highly irregular. There were leaks of an Australian origin in the United States about the ship. And of course, the result of these leaks was that there was an enormous hullabaloo politically that broke out. It was not possible for me to communicate with Lange at all because getting to the Tokelau's is an extremely difficult thing and there were no secure communications. So I had to deal with the situation the best I could. And there were some very big statements made from Australia and the US that had to be replied to. The level of rhetoric was very high. And the political situation became quite febrile.
Indeed. Well, so, you say that he only got the request from the States the day before he left for Tokelau, but he was involved, so says this book, in inviting that ship prior.
Well, I have no doubt that he was working on the issue because he told me he was, but I didn't know any detail at all. Now, you have to remember that he went off knowing that the request had come, but he had no idea that these leaks would occur while he was away, and everyone would assume that they would not be leaked because it was such a delicate decision that it could not be assumed that this was going to blow up in public in the way that it did. And the blowing up in public made it an extremely difficult situation for him and for me.
So that means that in essence, David Lange was contemplating allowing a US Navy vessel to visit New Zealand.
We always said, and our policy was unequivocal about this, that we wanted to keep New Zealand nuclear free and we wanted to stay in ANZUS. And from the point of view of the Americans, they said, you cannot compromise the neither confirm nor deny policy as to whether a ship is carrying nuclear weapons. And we said, we don't want to do that. We won't confront it. We'll make up our own mind. And that was the process that we were going through on this request when it got out of hand completely because of the leaks.
But at the same time, with respect to Geoffrey, David Lange was very much, and the Labour Party, putting out this line that absolutely this was not negotiable. There wouldn't be a ship visit. Behind the scenes, he was quietly working on it.
I don't think he was ever saying there wouldn't be a ship visit. What he was saying was that New Zealand would be kept nuclear free and we wanted to stay in ANZUS. That was the policy line, and indeed the public opinion polls at the time supported both those aims very clearly. And it came down in the end to a question of proof. Now, in Gerald's book, he says that I applied a very high standard of proof to the letter that Jamieson, or the advice that Air Marshal Jamieson gave us. But I was thinking we had to satisfy the public. We had a policy and the public did not want us to do a U-turn on it. And I treated it as how you would treat a jury. We had to convince the New Zealand public, the jury, about whether or not the vessel we let in satisfied our policy.
Okay.
And I didn't think that the documents that were given were sufficiently clear to allow that to be done. And Indeed, I had a discussion with the Minister of Defence about that, because he was the only other one who had the documents besides me. That's
OK.
Franco Flynn.
Well, those cabinet papers that outlined the ship visit, Gerald Hensley says the first you saw of those was when David Lange was in the islands.
That's true. That's absolutely true, but I studied them when I got them pretty closely.
Why didn't Lange show them to you as his acting Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, I doubt that I think he only was told about them when he got to Auckland. I mean, they're not the sort of documents that you can push around very easily. I think he felt in his own mind that the matter could be dealt with properly when he got back, that he would circulate the documents to Cabinet then, and we could go through a proper decision-making process. And indeed, in the memorandum I sent him via Ross Vintner, I made it very clear that that was open and he might want to choose to do that. And,
so what did you say specifically? Do you remember what you sent in that note with Ross Vintner?
Yes, I do. I've got it. I said that he should not make any decision at Cabinet, that we should have further discussions, that we should talk to the caucus, and then we should have a look at the whole thing. Now, of course, the judgment that he made, and I think it was right, was the situation was so tense politically that you really didn't have the opportunity to do that. And the interpretation I place on this is that the people who did the leaking wanted to impose enormous pressure on our government to make a decision to let the ship in, and the difficulty about that pressure was that it was entirely counterproductive.
Did you get the impression, though, in the lead-up to all of this, that David Lange was ready to give way on this anti-nuclear policy?
I don't think we were ever prepared to give way on the anti-nuclear policy. What we wanted to do was to square the circle and allow us to have the anti-nuclear policy and remain in ANZUS, and because of the neither confirm nor deny policy, that proved to be impossible. Now, I think it could have been possible if certain developments occurred, but they never did. And I formed the opinion when I went to Washington to try and settle it, that it was not possible to square the circle.
Right. So when you did go to Washington, and I'd like to read you something from Gerald Hensley's book about that visit. He said, he writes, the embassy had in the customary way prepared a brief for the Deputy Prime Minister. Palmer waved it away, saying he had lived in the country for 6 years and knew Americans well and had been at the University of Chicago with Paul Wolfowitz and got better marks than he did. Is that a fair account, Sir Geoffrey?
No, it's garbled, and the whole of Gerald's account of this is garbled, I'm afraid, because he wasn't there. I didn't know whether I got better marks than Wolfowitz at Chicago. What I was trying to refer, and I referred to that to him to talk about a professor who taught us both, who was an expert in realpolitik, and I thought that what Wolfowitz was doing was practising realpolitik on New Zealand, and that was a method of trying to tell him that. I had advisors with me. I had the Deputy Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Tim Francis. I had Colin Keating, and I had John Henderson from the Prime Minister's Department. I took all the briefings that were there. I put them all together in my own handwriting and got together a presentation, which I still have in my own handwriting, of 6 points that I thought we could settle the dispute with.
Okay.
Now, it turned out that we couldn't because our formula said we will make up our own mind. And the Secretary of State, Mr Schultz, who was a very clever and direct man, was quite clear. He said, I know New Zealanders. New Zealanders are people who believe in the rule of law, they have democracy, they are very direct, they are not going to suffer from deception, and they won't be able to live with ambiguity. If the New Zealand government says that a ship is coming in because it meets their policy, then everyone in the world will know that is true, and that breaks the neither confirm nor deny policy. That was the clearest statement that I got in Washington about why this wouldn't work, and I thought from that moment it was not possible to settle this dispute. And although a lot of people went on with further work for more months to try and settle it, it never did prove to be possible.
Hensley also says that on that trip, one of your opening lines, and perhaps it's the handwritten speech you referred to there, was that you said, "We New Zealanders are a uniquely spiritual and caring people."
I did not say that. I don't know where that came from. What I said was that New Zealanders are ordinary people like those from Iowa and Vermont. They are not extremists. They go to church, and they're just ordinary people. And that was supposed to indicate to the Americans that this policy had widespread support, and furthermore, that it was supported by a lot of the churches, as it was. They were very active in this. I mean, the trouble with Gerald's book is that it is a narrative of an extremely good diplomatic history put together from diplomatic sources, many, many sources. The difficulty with it is it comes with an angle of narration. It is the angle of narration of someone who is opposed to the policy. That is to say, who thought that we should have stayed in ANZUS, and if we had to sacrifice the anti-nuclear policy, we should have done so. Well, I don't agree with that. The Labor Party, there's an alternative policy narrative to all of this. It's the alternative policy narrative of the peace movement, of the Labor Party, of the years of protest going back to Mururoa Atoll in 1973 when New Zealand sent a frigate up there to protest French nuclear testing. I don't think either that this was a policy of nationalism. It was a policy of anti-nuclearism.
Well, we will certainly put some of what you suggest to Mr Hensley.
It was well put into the New Zealand public. They had it in their minds, and the government could mess with that at its peril.
Thank you very much for your time, Sir Geoffrey Palmer. Appreciate it.